Today, I just might burst your bubble a little bit, so sorry in advance, but I want to share with you something that I've seen consistently over the entire time that we've run Nomad Capitalist, and the feedback that we've gotten not only from our audience, but from the people that we actually work with in accomplishing their goals. And that is that if you come from a country like the United States, from Canada, from Australia, from Western Europe, where things are really expensive, where real estate is perhaps rather toppy, as they say, and you want to go overseas and chase some of the great deals that we talk about in up-and-coming markets, you just might get a little too aggressive sometimes in thinking just how cheap things are. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of perspective along with a story on how to find good deals overseas, but also how not to get sucked into a trap of endlessly seeking value that may not exist. My name is Andrew Henderson, and here at Nomad Capitalist, we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where they're treated best overseas, second passports, tax planning, investment ideas. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. And it comes from those investment ideas. Oftentimes, someone makes an investment in order to get a residence permit, in order to get a second citizenship, to expand their options. They put the two things together. And what do we see in our company? What have we seen over the years? Well, we have our own real estate department. We research deals, we find agents around the world, we sometimes go out into the field and we meet these people. We're getting deals in local languages in many cases. We have people who speak different languages that we work with so that we're not paying the gringo or the expat price. And so we really focus on finding pretty good deals. People have come to me and they've said, listen, Andrew, I'll do this Portugal Golden Visa. If I lose 50 or 100 grand, so be it. That's just the price of doing business there. And I often say, no, let's find the best deals. But let me tell you a story. Almost a decade ago, I went to Turkey for the first time, and I started in Istanbul. I stayed in a hotel because I was not the Nomad Capitalist by name back then. I wasn't where I am today. So I stayed in a hotel, not a bad hotel, near Taksim Square. And I spent a lot of my time in that area. If you've been to Istanbul, it's a very interesting area. It's certainly not the glitziest area. I spent a lot of my time in the old town across the Bosphorus, going to a lot of the tourist sites. That was the Istanbul that I knew. Second or third time I went back, and I really started to get to know the city more intimately. I remember one time I was looking up restaurants, and I found what is to this day one of my favorite restaurants to go anywhere in the world. I always go there when I'm in Istanbul, and it's so unassuming, but it's so nice. It's called Başköşe in an area of Istanbul called Nişantaşı. And I remember walking, because I love to walk, and I dragged a friend of mine and I along, and we walked from the Ritz-Carlton, which is kind of in Taksim Square, and we kind of walked through this park and up and around, and we were coming down the street. It was at night, and we didn't really know what we were getting into. And we entered into this neighborhood, this Nişantaşı. And I said to myself, wow, this is like incredible. They have all the nice boutiques. They have Prada, they have Hermes, they have the local Turkish boutiques. This is just a really ritzy area, and there's some really beautiful buildings, and people are well dressed, and they're sitting out on cafes, they're having coffee. This looks like a great lifestyle. And so if you're coming to a place like Turkey for the first time, you might say, well, hey, Turkey is an amazing deal. Andrew's talked about the amazing prices. You know, my standard of $1,000 a meter for really cheap real estate in the center of a city. You will find that right now in Taksim Square, in that area, some of those areas around there, perhaps in parts of Cihangir, parts of Bomonti, all around that part of central Istanbul, and of course in some of the suburban areas as well. You can find some really good deals, and I've been looking at some of those. You pay $40,000, $50,000 for a property, and you know, you might be next to some weird nightclub or something in a thin alleyway, but it's not a badly renovated property. We have people on our team who speak Turkish, and we find these properties all the time. Great located, might be a great place to lay over if you wanted to add to your global real estate collection, work towards a residence, work towards a passport. But then you go to the ritzy area, like Nişantaşı, and you are not going to find those deals there. Why? Because those districts are name brands. Could be Polanco in Mexico City, could be Vaque in Tbilisi. Every city has one. Could be Tverskaya in Moscow, or anywhere around the world. Midtown Manhattan in New York, right? Bel Air, Beverly Hills in Los Angeles. Every city has their name brand. And here's what you have to understand. Much like in the fashion world, these name brands in other countries may not be readily known to you in your country, but there is certainly a contingent of very wealthy people in Turkey and in that region who they want to buy in the best place. Even in Armenia, Northern Avenue, if you have one of the stone buildings and the stone apartments along Northern Avenue, along Pushkin Street in Yerevan, I mean, people pay a premium to live in those places. And I look at that fashion world, and I look at a model like Louis Vuitton, which is owned by LVMH, huge luxury conglomerate. Everyone knows Louis Vuitton, and certainly not cheap. But did you know they also own brands like Goyard? Probably haven't heard of Goyard, because they price their stuff a lot higher than Louis Vuitton. And yet, if you're not part of the clique of the wealthy, the ultra wealthy, people who live in these kind of neighborhoods, you may not have seen one of these bags because they don't market them nearly as wide as they would a brand like a Louis Vuitton, a more mass market luxury brand. And in exchange, people who are in the know pay a much bigger premium. I mean, think $10,000, $20,000. Hermes has their Birkin bags. They happen to be well known, but people are paying tens of thousands of dollars for bags. And the average person who is in the Taksim Square area, for example, may not know what those brands are, but the people in those neighborhoods perhaps do. And I think there's a kind of a corollary between those two things, where you've got people who are willing to buy in the relatively limited amount of space, even in these huge cities, the relatively limited amount of space in these areas. And so when you go to Istanbul, and I'll have people say, I want to live in the best neighborhood, I want to have a view, I want to have 100 meters, and I want to pay $100,000. We can find you something in many of these cities for $100,000 that meets that criteria. Maybe the view isn't quite there. But to say that I want to live in the neighborhood where all the wealthiest people live, it's just not going to happen. I think that there has to be an understanding of that, right? Beachfront property everywhere, pretty cheap. Now, if you can find places that are up and coming that have not developed their brands as well, perhaps the country itself hasn't been developed as a brand, perhaps the country itself hasn't developed nearly as much wealth internally, that can be one way to save money. And so how do you find a good deal? Well, step number one is, if you're looking to buy in the Balkans, for example, Croatia's been done. They happen to have pretty high taxes, and I don't really necessarily like their government's vibe necessarily, but Croatia's been done. That's not going to be as cheap. Montenegro, where I have a home, that's already on the radar. They're part of the Eurozone. Lots of people are going there. They've got Porto Montenegro. They've got UNESCO heritage sites. People are talking about it. Maybe not where you live, but in a lot of other places. And so that's not going to be cheap. You might go down the coast to Albania, right? They really haven't developed their image yet. There's areas like Saranda in the south that are beautiful, and you can buy stuff really cheap. But who's talking about Albania, right? Well, that's the point. You got to go there before people are talking about it. You have to go there before they offer a residence by investment program or a citizenship by investment program where people start to flood in. Turkey, for example, I think you've seen some of the kind of view properties that people that we work with like snatched up by the literally, I think something like 15,000 families that have applied for citizenship by investment in barely the first year of Turkey lowering the price on its citizenship by investment program. Albania has a program. If you buy property, you can become a resident. That may or may not do much for you in their case, but if you're looking for a cheap beachfront property, that's a place to go. When I first started going to Nicaragua 7 or 8 years ago, parts of Nicaragua were still great deals, and they still may be good deals in the context of that region. Up in the north, like Chinandega, was becoming more interesting as areas in the south, like San Juan del Sur, were becoming a bit more pricey and a bit more known among the expats who went down to this relatively small country. There's not that much land to build on. And so you want to look out for these up-and-coming places because, again, beachfront, everyone wants beachfront everywhere, right? I mean, even in a country like El Salvador, next to Nicaragua, I went there, the deals aren't really as great as I would have expected because you have a relatively small domestic market of people who are wealthy, who want to invest in their own country, and they buy the best properties. And I see that again and again and again. So that's your competition if you're going overseas. Point number two that you can look at for getting better deals is look at markets that perhaps have some up-and-coming potential or neighborhoods that have up-and-coming potential in individual cities. So if you go to Mexico City, I spent a lot of time there recently, you go to Polanco. It's expensive. It's beautiful, and it's a great place to shop and eat, and you just imagine yourself. It's so luxurious. It's the same as Nishan Tashi in Istanbul. But if you go to Cuauhtemoc, along Reforma, there's some really nice areas Now, you maybe want to be careful of the noise. You don't want to buy in the wrong place, but if you do your research, you can find some properties in Cuauhtémoc, perhaps Roma Norte, other areas like that, Roma Sur if you're even a bit more adventurous. And you're going to pay less per square meter. You're going to get better deals. The sellers that I spoke to in Cuauhtémoc, for example, I remember being 50 meters from the park, the big park in Mexico City, right behind some of the nicest hotels. And the sellers were ready to wheel and deal on this big, really nice property. You could do a nice renovation. But it wasn't in Polanco. It wasn't next to all the Michelin star restaurants where you certainly pay a premium. Okay? In Tbilisi, the Tatsminda district, I think I've been saying for years, is kind of jammed in between two great districts, but it hasn't gotten as much love. So every city has an area like that. I think, again, in Istanbul, it's around Taksim Square. Now, the challenge is, depending on how much you want to invest, an apartment in a Taksim Square at Tatsmin, it might take a lot longer for you to be able to resell. For example, if you're doing a citizenship by investment program in Turkey, a $250,000 apartment in that area, number one, may not appraise because there's not enough comparables in that area. Number two, you're probably going to be relatively illiquid compared to something in a more ritzy district because there's just not a lot of demand at that price point of that market. And so those factors of, if you're doing an investment migration program for residence or citizenship, you need to figure out what's the best investment that I can actually liquidate in the future. But that's also important to keep in mind. And so those are two steps that you can apply to get better deals. I think that what people do, again, particularly where I come from, the United States, I'll call up friends of mine and I'll tell them where I'm going, and they've never heard of some of these places. And so for them to imagine that people would be buying, beachfront property for, 100, 200, 300 euros or dollars or whatever per meter, they would say, well, that's ridiculous. Why can't you just get like a 10,000 square foot mansion for 50 grand, right on the beach? And perhaps if you go outside of the city, there are some deals. That would be my third recommendation, is if you're looking just for your own use, get outside of the city. And I think if you combine get outside of the city with get into markets that aren't talked about as much, go and look at beachfront mansions in Morocco, for example. Go and look at that in some other parts of Northern Africa or the Middle East, right? But the reaction from some folks in the West is, I don't want to live in Morocco, right? And so, that's perhaps why the prices are lower, right? But you always have to look at domestic demand. You have to look at international demand. Speaking of beachfront property, years ago I was in Sihanoukville in Cambodia, and you could buy condos for nothing. Probably 10, 15 grand you could buy an apartment. Now prices have gone up fivefold, probably, maybe sixfold in some areas along that beach area. Why? It wasn't a domestic issue. There's only 3,000 or 4,000 high net worth individuals in Cambodia. It was a regional issue, namely China. They came in and bought the place up. They're turning it into the next mini Macau. And so that affected things because some other power decided to go in, some other market of people decided to go into a country that perhaps you never even thought of. And so these are the things that you need to consider. You always want to figure out where is the demand. And if you realize that, and if you chase the off-brand opportunities, if you chase the places that are up and coming, you'll get a lot better deals. But understand that there are areas in any place, even in the most developing countries, where the best areas are always going to command a premium, potentially even a much higher premium in the countries where there's such a great income inequality issue, where people with money really want to isolate themselves. That's what you want to keep in mind to find good property deals around the world. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.